The Winnipeg Jets have a bit of a second line center problem, and I've seen a number of comments suggesting who might fill this void. Is anyone on this team capable of playing that role? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we have to talk about the center issue because through the first 3 games of the Jets season, I think it's very clear that Winnipeg's center position is a little bit vulnerable. Part of it is, in my mind, a question of how to allocate the limited center talent that you do have. Are you making the most of it? Is there somebody who should be promoted? How should you handle a lineup that, quite frankly, doesn't have an out-and-out scoring 2C, but has guys who could probably fill the role? We'll chat about that in just a moment, but before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, I've talked a little bit about the 2C problem in previous episodes, and I thought Namestnikov was going to be a guy who could potentially handle this role. I think the start to the season has maybe sown a little bit of doubt into that assumption. I don't think Namestnikov has quite run away with the role in the first couple of games, and it is early. We've seen him do this stuff before where he was actually pretty good in this role. So there is reason to believe that he could bounce back and that this is just a temporary setback. But if Namestnikov really can't keep up these days and is better off in a bottom 6 role, then the Jets kind of have a 2C gap. They've got a real question as to who could step up. Now, the interesting thing is the Jets already do have a 2C, but I don't think he gets recognized as it that often. They're talked about, in third line terms, but it's funny because the Jets' third line actually plays as more of a second line. And of course, I'm talking about Lowry's line. We all know who it is. Those of you who have listened to this podcast long enough know that I have some concerns about overusing this line, which is an amazing shutdown, phenomenal two-way line, a great chance creation machine, and they almost always win their battles. But the problem is, for all that they do, they just don't score enough. And so, there's been some thought about how you make the most of Lowry's skill sets. Is it by pairing him with more forecheckers? Should you add more skill to his line? And I think if Namestnikov continues to struggle, you could ask the question of whether it makes sense to move Lowry between guys like Perfetti, Connor, Ehlers, that sort of skill set. And with Lowry, I don't think he would be able to increase his goal production by much, but I do think he is a pretty nice passer and a big setup guy. And so as long as he's on the ice, he can kind of help dictate the terms and open up space for his goal-scoring line mates to make the most of the chances and space he creates. So in a lot of ways, there is a chance that it could work. But Lowry's also a very ground and pound kind of player, and most of our skill guys don't really adopt that sort of approach. And so I don't know if it's going to reduce Lowry's overall effectiveness or not. In terms of other potential options, Cole Perfetti could technically play center. I don't know that he really will. I don't know if it's going to be a huge improvement over Namestnikov, but my guess is it's probably not going to be worse. Perfetti has played center before, and it didn't go badly. I don't think it was like set the world on fire good, but given your options where Namestnikov looks like he's just struggling to keep up with some of the typical stuff, maybe Perfetti at center wouldn't be the worst idea. I've also seen some shouts for Kupari, and here's the thing with Kupari. I like him a lot, and I think he's done really well early into the season, but he's done well as a 4C. I think if you start to ask him to do more, the limitations in this game and the reason why he's not asked to play a bigger role with the squad starts to become apparent. He is a very, how do I put this? If you took Brandon Tanev and kind of gave him a more well-rounded physical attribute set in softer hands, that's kind of what you get with Kupari. But I mean, at times, earlier Brandon Tanev. Kupari's not quite as raw as Tanev was when he first joined the Jets, but in a lot of ways, the processing speed and the decision-making, especially when you're trying to create offense, is kind of a problem for Kupari when he starts to go into those moments of improvisation. It's not that he can't make plays. He definitely can. And I think we've seen him attack the slot in space better than he has in previous years. But I think for him, his game has to be relatively simple. And if you start playing with Perfetti and Ehlers, your game's not going to be simple. Lowry, I think, while he may struggle to make specific goals happen, understands where he needs to be, and he's a really smart player on the ice. Kupari, I don't know if he has that high level of a read. And so for me, as much as I think he's impressed in his current role, I would be loath to ask him to do significantly more. I think you start courting danger and you start maybe overestimating what his potential is. And that's not to say that he could never do it. I just don't think I want to find out. If it happens, I mean, it's okay, but I don't think I'd be surprised if Kupari does struggle to keep up in a big role. The 2C, especially if the Jets use it like a 2C, and it's not just the Lowry line, it is a very demanding position, and it's going to put a lot of emphasis on helping to carry and pick up some of the slack from some of the other lines that are maybe struggling to score. So in my mind, I don't think Kupari is entirely ready for that. You don't really have many other options. I guess your main hope is that Namestnikov just figures it out. And that is potentially a real solution, but I don't know how long it's going to take, and there's no guarantee that it happens. So you kind of want to have some insurance in your back pocket, and that's where I think maybe just having Lowry be the 2C with skill might be the safest option. But again, you start messing with line chemistry, suddenly that Lowry line is not going to be the same forechecking force that it was before. And what happens when you put Niederreiter and Appleton with somebody who's maybe not quite on the level of Lowry? Do they kind of fall off? I think that's a real question, a real concern. And so the Jets have this weird position of having guys who can play the role, but it does something else downstream that's not really helpful to the team. So I think our sum total hope is that Namestnikov just goes back to being normal Namestnikov and gets away from some of the reckless decision-making and general slow pace of his play that we've seen in the last few games. And again, it is important to remember it's just 3 games into the season, and Namestnikov doesn't really have a big track record of struggling like this, at least recently. He's had some bad stretches like every NHL player does, but I don't know that what we're seeing with him so far into the season is really indicative of what he's going to bring for the rest of the year. If it is, that is a problem, and the Jets are going to have to sort of work around that because Namestnikov's considered a key cog of this squad, and if he can't really be relied upon, the Jets might have to start thinking about maybe going back to the farm sooner than expected. I don't know that we have a healthy amount of centers. I don't think you want to bring in Brad Lambert for this specifically yet. I mean, you could, but I do think he'd probably end up overwhelmed by the NHL speed and the physicality of the game. So, darned if you do, darned if you don't. The Jets are in a really tight spot with this, and I think the main goal at this point is to survive until a better option emerges, whether that's from the Moose, from the Jets roster as it is, from one of the players that's actively in the lineup. I don't know. I'm just hoping that Namestnikov can kind of turn it around because either way, whether he plays at center or not, he is a big part of this team, and I would like him to remain that so long as he continues to be him at his best self. So a real tough question. I know that there's no real answers on the center question, at least right now, but I think we'll probably have some clarity over the next couple of games, whether Namestnikov sorts his stuff out or if he continues to struggle. Now, of course, speaking of some of our players that have maybe turned some heads, maybe caught some folks by surprise, I thought I'd chat a little bit about early breakout players that have so far impressed in our very limited sample size in just a little bit. Before we go much further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you are used to adding tickets to your cart and then going to check out, and wow, that $30 ticket sure turned into $70 really quickly. How did it happen? Well, you got hit with taxes, surprise fees, and a ton of other service charges. No one likes it. I don't. Gametime doesn't either, and that's why they want to help you save time and money by offering you tons of deals. And you can also opt into all-in pricing with their toggle option that lets you see everything you're paying up front. We all love to not be surprised when it comes to paying money, I promise you, unless you're a weirdo. But I think most of you who are buying tickets, you probably want to get from the start an accurate representation of your final price. And Gametime wants to help you save even more money and time, so they're offering you a service called Gametime Picks, which filters out the fluff to only show you the most incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to go digging through thousands of tickets. And of course, Gametime comes backed with a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. They're so sure that you're not going to find a better deal that if you do happen to find one somewhere else, they will credit you 110% of the difference. Who else does that? Gametime wants you to have a ton of fun. They want you to enjoy your event your way, and they'll even show you seat views before you buy. So if you want to help take the guesswork out of buying tickets, download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. I also wanted to spend a few minutes just chatting real quick about our partners at PrizePicks. And if you're wondering what PrizePicks is, it's the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. And if you want to know why they're such a great service, they put their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And when my picks hit, I can get my money in as little as 15 minutes. They also have invented the Flex Play, which means that you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. And look, having played fantasy sports before, and I can assure you my own picks in both football and hockey have sometimes not always hit, it's nice to have a little bit of insurance. And PrizePicks even helps you when you have injuries. They help you have an injury insurance policy, so if a player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, PrizePicks still keeps your actual lineup live. It's a great way to get in on the action with real money, and you can be sure that when you're setting your lineup, you don't have to worry about some of the other stuff that's going to disqualify you in a lot of other leagues. PrizePicks doesn't want you to get screwed over. They want you to have fun and win big, just like some of their biggest users like Drewski, Joe Budden, and Sean O'Malley. So if you're ready to get started, sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's just flat out guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Download the app today and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about some interesting stuff from early in the season. We've talked about the second line center problem. Now it's time to talk a little bit more positively about some early breakout players who have impressed. Some of these are surprising. Some of them are perhaps not that surprising. But let's start with Adam Lowry. Look, Lowry, no matter what you say about his finishing, he does everything else amazingly well. The guy is just a force of nature on the ice, and the only thing he really lacks is just the goal scoring. Everything else that he does constantly creates an absolute headache for his opponents. The guy is just made to be a menace in the offensive zone, and defensively, he's such a stout reader of the play. And because he knows how to use his physicality, he just seemingly does it all. There's a reason why he is the captain. And it's not just like one of these ceremonial things. I've always felt that Lowry, especially at his best, is a player who just has an attention to detail, but maybe expresses it a little more violently than some of your other typical players. He's not a guy who's going to be a finesse sort, so to speak, although he does actually show you some really nice skill in passing in the moments when you perhaps least expect it. But I think the most important thing is that he leads by example, and the way that his lines have dominated the opponents in the first couple of games is really impressive. This is, right now, Winnipeg's best line. And look, I do worry that it is because they don't score that much. But in the meantime, as long as they're winning their shifts, I think that's still the most important part of this. You don't want them to start conceding or giving up opportunities, and really opponents just aren't getting that much against them. So at the very minimum, if they're not scoring, they are still controlling play, and that's really all you could ask for. I've also got to give props to Kupari, who has stepped up big time in the 4C role, especially with the top six lines perhaps not scoring as much. It's not like the fourth line is really generating loads of offense, but they are doing some of the same things that the Lowry line is doing, and that's honestly all you could ask for. If your fourth line is just a two-way menace and happens to create chaos in the slot and really just wear down your opponents so that they make a mistake, you really can't ask for much more. Morgan Barron, of course, at some point is going to start finding the score sheet again. That guy, he is, for a fourth line kind of player, a very good finisher, and I do think at some point his offense is going to start becoming a little more noticeable. So I think, I've been impressed with the bottom six. I'll call them like a key grouping as a breakout candidate, just because in some capacity, whether it's Appleton, Kupari, Lowry, Niederreiter, any of these guys, even Iafallo, they've all played some kind of a role, and they've all been very effective. Now, a player that I'm kind of curious about this season is going to be Neil Pionk. I guess I can call this a slight breakout just because my expectations for Pionk this year are probably not abundantly high. I don't want to, negatively speak about players, especially guys that I know really bust their chops and put a lot of effort on the line every game. And that's Pionk to his core. For all my criticisms of his defensive awareness, the guy just wears his heart on his sleeve, and he is like a fight for the badge kind of player. It's just a shame that I think as he's getting older, it's harder for him to physically compensate for where he starts to get a little deficient. I think he's slowing down, and I think it's starting to become a little more noticeable even to himself. And I feel like he's tried to compensate, and sometimes that gets him into more trouble. So for Pionk, I'm curious to know if he can at least remain break even or above break even. Because the depth lines have kind of been carrying play, and the Jets haven't really faced anyone elite yet, I think you're not really seeing the defense being tested all that much. The Jets' defensive structure as a team is as tight as it's ever been. They're not really conceding many opportunities. In terms of expected goals against so far throughout the season, they're one of the top-ranked teams in limiting chances against. So I don't worry so much about that against weaker opponents. But once you start facing good teams, which, in fairness, there's not a ton this year, at least so far, but once you do start to see those squads, how is it going to hold up? And is Pionk going to be able to keep up? I think that could have a really big impact on the rest of the season, because it seems like the Jets just want to keep leaning on him. And whatever my reservations about that plan are, it doesn't really matter, because the Jets kind of do what the Jets want to do. And the Jets typically want to play Neil Pionk a lot. So if you're going to use him a lot, you just have to hope that he's at least breaking even. And so far, he's done his job well. Sandberg's probably helping at least with some of that. Dylan has been great so far to start the year. A few not so great turnovers and stuff, but I think he's trying to get a little more confident in possession and really carrying the puck further up the ice to be a more creative player. I think he understands that Dylan actually grew his game to do this a lot, and so he's trying to follow in those footsteps and add more versatility to his tool set. So, I think this defense so far hasn't looked like it's sweating too much, but I think once you start facing great opponents, that's where you might start to worry a little bit. But like I said, the good news is there's not a ton of those teams so far, and I don't know that that's necessarily going to change until we start getting towards the trade deadline in a few months. But all that said, if there's one breakout candidate, and I calling this a breakout candidate is just so silly, but I guess we're going to talk about Connor Hellebuyck, because who else do you really want to talk about as having another breakout season? I feel like it's sort of a bit of an oxymoron with him, but the guy just seemingly puts on Vezina performances every year now, and I don't even know what else to say about it. The guy is he's the best Jets goalie ever. He's already one of the greatest goalies in NHL history. I think he's going to continue to add to his repertoire. The last thing that he needs is a ring. That's all I want to see, is Connor Hellebuyck hoisting a cup at some point in the future, or just before I die. I don't care when it happens, as long as it does happen. for the Jets. If he goes somewhere else and wins a cup, I'm just not going to acknowledge it. Yes, I will for some personal reasons, but for the most part, I want him to win here and win for this team because he's already given of himself completely to Winnipeg, and so now it's just time for the Jets to maybe help him out a little bit and get this team into a more competitive state. But if they can figure that out, his breakout performances every year will finally start to get rewarded. I'll tell you, he drags this team kicking and screaming into the playoffs every season now. So let's just hope that he doesn't have to drag the team kicking and screaming this time, and that they just make it of their own accord. But yeah, I think this year's narrative so far, again, just the first few games, is that the depth is really trying to carry the load, and at some point you worry that that's not going to be sustainable for much longer. But I guess that is a tomorrow problem, as they say. Now, for the Jets, I think there is one last question, one last concern. I mean, there's a laundry list of stuff that they're probably looking at, but Cole Perfetti's, quiet start to the season is probably one of the bigger things the Jets aren't thrilled with. We'll chat about, what this might mean for his future with the team, at least just this season, and whether it's really worth being upset about. We'll get to that all in just a moment, but before we go any further, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. For those of you tracking the first 6 weeks of action, it's been insane. There have been some big upsets. The Bears are apparently good, although they keep beating up crap teams, so I don't know if I fully believe that. But the Washington Commanders, I'll tell you, that team is for real. Jaden Daniels, I know the Ravens beat them, and I'm a Ravens fan, so I enjoyed that. But I'll be the first to admit that I enjoyed watching Jaden Daniels being calm and composed in the pocket. But maybe you're watching Daniels, or perhaps you're a Vikings fan, and you're starting to get a little bit of a hunch about maybe that defense in the middle of the game. Well, where you place your bets, you can also check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all at FanDuel.com, so that you're making sure that you're actually getting the most informed bets possible. When you place your first $5 bet, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed with your first $5 bet only at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's closing thoughts on this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Well, I guess we've now kind of narrowed it down to, a number of different problems that we've identified early into the start of the season. Again, I know it is 3 games into the year, but let's be real, right? This team is functionally pretty similar to last year's squad, and so it's going to have some of the same last year's squad problems. Now, one thing that's kind of not been great to start is Cole Perfetti's performance in the first few games. And I think part of this is just his line just doesn't work. Whether it's a lack of chemistry, Namestnikov struggling, Ehlers kind of struggling to match his style of play with the rest of the line's skill sets, there's just something that's not working for Perfetti. And it's not like he's not creating any sorts of chances. He's had a couple of really good reads. And I think against Minnesota, there were a couple of moments where he started to attack that space in front of the goalie that we all love so much. But, pointless in the first couple of games, probably not the most exciting outcome. I had him having a 50 to 60 point season this year. And based on how he's being used, we're not really going to get close to that. So I would expect things to change at some point. The thing with Perfetti is that he's a really hardworking kid. He's super smart. And if there's one player that just seems to understand the value of putting your nose to the grindstone and coming away improving on some of your legitimate deficiencies, and in his case, it's been his skating for the most part. Perfetti is one of those guys that I think is really on the right track for how to fix some of the stuff. Now, he's not going to be able to fix his stride necessarily, and there are parts of his game that are just always going to be a little bit questionable, more so on the physical side than anything. But in terms of his vision, his passing, his creativity and playmaking, that stuff I just don't really worry about. And I know that there were some comments, or maybe one comment on this past video about Perfetti showing his value. I don't actually think that's true. I don't think we've actually seen anywhere near what Perfetti is capable of. And how do I know this? Well, he had almost 40 points last season playing 12 minutes a night. So clearly he is a phenomenally talented player, and there's something else going on. And that's something else for me, at least right now, is just that his line just doesn't work. He's not the kind of player like McDavid or any of those guys who just single-handedly take the puck and drive an entire trio by themselves. Even McDavid is not doing that much this season. So, for Perfetti, to struggle with some of this stuff, I'm not as worried. I think if it continues for a few months, you start to sweat a little bit. I guess the good news is it gives him less contract negotiation leverage, but I think for the Jets, just hoping that he's an impact player, yeah, that wouldn't be ideal. For a second-year pro, you really want him to show those signs of growth and that he's starting to really figure out the NHL level and become a more effective player. But like I said, he already has a decent track record playing extremely limited minutes under Rick Bowness. I can only imagine that as his role starts to grow and Arniel starts to maybe make a few swaps to the lines, that at some point Perfetti will start to gain more confidence and really explode the way that I believe he can. He is a guy that the Jets are going to really lean heavily on this season, and they just can't really afford for him to continue to honestly look more like a bottom six player than a top six guy. So am I worried about him right now? No. I have confidence in Perfetti. If there's a player that's really, in my mind, earned trust, given some of the circumstances that Perfetti has gone through, I'd probably rate him pretty highly in that regard. So again, I think he'll figure it out. He's a smart player, hardworking kid, and it's just a question of how long is this bit of a drought for him going to last. I don't think it'll last too long. I think he'll start to put two and two together, and if Ehlers maybe moves to a different line and perhaps Conor and Perfetti are reunited, maybe that'll spark everyone's offense altogether. But I don't know. I'm just spitballing. The Jets coaching staff seems to have their own ideas as to how to fix this. I haven't really agreed with many of them yet, but at least they're trying to do stuff. I just hope that Arniel remains open-minded, that he's thoughtful. So far, the actions of the coaching staff haven't exactly aligned to the words, in my opinion, but there is always still time to reverse that and make this squad look a little more functional. But, a very interesting start to the year for the Jets. I don't know if I necessarily had them going 3-0 while scoring no 5v5 goals in 2 straight games, but somehow they're here. And again, they've also had to tie the goal or score a goal to tie the game with the goalie pulled twice in consecutive games, which I just don't think ever really happens. It's hard enough to happen for one game, let alone 2 straight. And so, yeah, the Jets are a weird team this year. I'm still trying to figure them out. I'd be curious to know what you think of them. What do they do, in your opinion? I'm doing the Office Space meme. What would you say you do here? Well, what do you think the Jets are doing? Are you impressed with their play? Do you have questions and concerns? Drop your thoughts below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. While I have your attention, I did want to recommend making your second listen of the day Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And with that's going to be me signing off for the evening. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with more Jets summer coverage and start of the season coverage. So we'll see you soon. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.